All right, let's go. Number 10. The Insectothopter. In 1974, the Office of Research and Development inside the Central Intelligence Agency completed a working prototype of a remote-controlled aerial vehicle. It was 28 millimeters long, it weighed less than a gram, it was built to look, fly, and move indistinguishably from a common dragonfly. The Insectothopter, as it was designated internally, was powered by a miniaturized gas engine that drove its 4 wings at the same frequency as a real dragonfly's wing beat. It carried a listening device. It was designed to be guided to a target location, a park bench, an open window, a garden terrace, and hold position long enough to transmit whatever conversation was taking place nearby. From a distance of several hundred meters, it would be invisible. From close range, it would be a dragonfly. The project was led by a team of engineers and entomologists working in collaboration, because building a vehicle that mimics insect flight at that scale required understanding insect flight at that scale. The research drew on studies of dragonfly musculature, wing surface geometry, and aerodynamic behavior at low Reynolds numbers, the fluid dynamics of insect-scale flight, which operate by completely different principles than aircraft-scale flight. The device worked in controlled conditions. It flew, it transmitted. But here is where the Insectothopter story becomes a more honest window into the reality of covert technology development than the device itself. The program was discontinued, not because the technology failed in principle, but because the device could not maintain stable flight in crosswinds of any significant speed. A natural outdoor environment is not a controlled laboratory. Wind is unpredictable at the microscale. A dragonfly compensates for crosswind through real-time neurological processing that no 1974 guidance system could replicate. The gap between what the device could do in a test chamber and what it needed to do in the field was, in practical terms, absolute. The CIA had built a working remote-controlled dragonfly in 1974. It simply could not fly outside on a windy day. The program's documentation was declassified decades later, and the device itself is now on display in the CIA Museum at Langley, a museum that is not open to the public.
Number 9. Operation Acoustic Kitty. In 1966, the Directorate of Science and Technology at the CIA approved funding and operational development for a surveillance program whose central asset was a cat. Not a camera disguised as a cat, not a robotic cat, a living cat, surgically modified to function as a mobile listening device. Operation Acoustic Kitty, as the program was designated, involved implanting a microphone in the cat's ear canal, a radio transmitter at the base of its skull, and a thin antenna wire woven through its fur and along its tail. The surgery was performed by veterinary surgeons under CIA contract. The total cost of the program, including research, development, surgical procedures, and training, reached an estimated $20 million over the course of its operational development. The logic was coherent by the standards of Cold War intelligence thinking. Cats move through environments undetected. A cat sitting near a park bench where 2 Soviet intelligence officers are meeting does not register as a threat. A cat is not searched at a checkpoint. A cat can go where a human operative cannot. The training component attempted to address the most obvious operational problem. Cats do not take direction. Extensive behavioral conditioning was attempted to make the cat move towards specific targets and hold position near them. The training achieved partial results under controlled conditions. But here is where Operation Acoustic Kitty's operational debut ends the program's story in a single paragraph. On the first field test in Washington, the trained cat was released near a park where Soviet personnel were known to gather. According to the account provided by a former CIA officer in a documentary interview decades later, the cat was struck and killed by a taxi within moments of being released. A separate CIA internal assessment, partially declassified, described the program as simply not practical for operations, citing the difficulty of controlling the animal in field conditions. The CIA spent $20 million across several years to reach the conclusion that cats cannot be reliably directed. The program was terminated. The directorate officer who wrote the final assessment described it in the declassified document as a remarkable scientific achievement, noting that the surgeries had worked exactly as designed. The problem was not the technology. The problem was the cat. Number 8. The heart attack gun. On September 16, 1975, Senator Frank Church held up a device during a hearing of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and asked the Director of Central Intelligence to explain what it was. The device was approximately the size and shape of a pistol. It fired a frozen dart of shellfish toxin at a velocity too low to penetrate clothing significantly, but sufficient to puncture skin. The dart, composed of frozen shellfish toxin, would melt after entering the body, leaving no recoverable foreign material. The toxin would induce a heart attack. The heart attack would be indistinguishable from a naturally occurring cardiac event at autopsy because the only physical evidence of the dart's entry, a small red mark on the skin roughly the size of a mosquito bite, would typically not be identified unless an examiner was specifically looking for it. The device was real. The technical capability was real. The requirement that produced it was real. The records that would document its operational history remain classified. Number 7. The hollow coin. In 1953, a newsboy in Brooklyn, New York, received a nickel in payment for a newspaper. The nickel felt wrong. It was too light. He dropped it, and it split open when it hit the ground. Inside the hollow coin was a tiny piece of microfilm. The microfilm contained a series of numbers that, when decrypted, formed a coded message intended for a Soviet intelligence officer operating undercover in the United States. The newsboy brought the coin to the police. The police brought it to the FBI. The FBI could not immediately decode the message. They did not yet have the cipher key. The hollow nickel entered the FBI's evidence archive, where it sat for 4 years. In 1957, a KGB officer named Reino Heihanen defected to the United States and provided American intelligence with the information needed to decode the message inside the coin. The decoded content led directly to the identification and arrest of Rudolf Abel, one of the most senior Soviet intelligence officers ever caught operating on American soil, who had been running a network of agents in the United States for nearly a decade. The hollow coin was the foundational technology of Soviet dead-drop communication in North America. The principle was simple: ordinary currency, indistinguishable from legitimate coins in circulation that could carry encoded microfilm messages between intelligence officers and their handlers without requiring any direct contact between them. The coin changed hands in ordinary commercial transactions. It could sit in someone's pocket for days. It could pass through multiple hands before reaching its intended recipient. But here is where the hollow coin reveals something about the infrastructure of Cold War intelligence that a single recovered nickel does not convey on its own. The FBI, after Heihanen's defection, launched a systematic effort to identify and recover additional hollow coins and dead drop containers that had been distributed across the United States. What they found was that the program was not limited to coins. Cufflinks, hollow pencils, sections of fence posts, a bolt on a park bench, battery casings. Every object in a public environment is a potential container. The Soviet intelligence dead drop program had seeded the physical infrastructure of American cities with hundreds of concealed communication containers, most of which were never recovered. The Brooklyn nickel that split open when a child dropped it was the visible edge of a communication architecture that extended through the physical fabric of American daily life and whose full extent was never completely mapped. Number 6. The SELECTRIC Bug.
In 1976, a routine security sweep of the United States Embassy in Moscow detected something that American intelligence had not previously encountered in any form they recognized. Embedded inside the mechanisms of IBM SELECTRIC typewriters used by American embassy staff to type classified documents was a listening device of a sophistication that American counterintelligence engineers described in classified assessments as representing a significant advance in technical collection capability. The device did not transmit audio, it did not contain a microphone, it did not capture the sound of keys being struck. Instead, it monitored the movement of the Selectric's type ball, the spherical element that rotates and tilts to select individual letters before striking the paper, through a network of magnetized sensors embedded in the typewriter's housing. Each letter corresponds to a unique combination of rotational and tilt positions of the type ball. The device read the type ball's position at the moment of each keystroke and transmitted that data as a radio signal to Soviet receivers operating from nearby buildings. The device did not capture what was heard in the room, it captured what was typed. The SELECTRIC Bug, designated Gunman by American investigators after its discovery, had been planted inside American typewriters and typewriters in other American diplomatic facilities across the Soviet Union at some point during routine servicing or shipping. The KGB had access to the typewriters during transit or maintenance windows and had used that access to implant the devices before the machines reached American facilities. But here is where the Gunman operations timeline becomes the most disturbing element of its history. American investigators, examining the recovered devices and comparing them to the classified documents that had been typed in the affected facilities during the years the bugs were operational, determined that the program had been running, undetected, for approximately 8 years before the 1976 discovery. Every classified document typed in those facilities during that period had been transmitted in real time to Soviet intelligence. 8 years of diplomatic cables, intelligence assessments, strategic planning documents, and communications between American facilities and Washington, typed by American officials who believed they were operating in a secure environment, transmitted character by character to KGB receivers positioned across the street. The security sweep that found the device was not targeted, it was routine. For 8 years, no targeted search had identified what was inside the typewriters that sat on the desks of American embassies in Moscow.
Number 5. The Great Seal Bug. In 1945, a delegation of Soviet schoolchildren presented the United States ambassador to the Soviet Union with a carved wooden plaque of the Great Seal of the United States as a gesture of friendship. The plaque was mounted in the ambassador's study in Spaso House, the American ambassador's official residence in Moscow. It remained there for 7 years. In 1952, a British radio operator monitoring Soviet transmissions detected an anomalous signal that appeared to originate from within Spaso House when American personnel were speaking in the ambassador's study. American and British intelligence agencies launched a joint investigation. The investigation eventually focused on the carved wooden plaque. The device inside the plaque was later described by CIA technical analysts as the most elegant piece of surveillance technology they had encountered to that point. It had no battery, it had no power source, it had no active electronic components in the conventional sense. It consisted of a small resonant cavity and a thin membrane connected to a small antenna. By itself, it did nothing and transmitted nothing. When illuminated by a specific radio frequency directed at the building from outside, from a Soviet vehicle or installation positioned nearby, the device became active. The incoming radio wave energized the resonant cavity, which vibrated in response to sound waves in the room: voices, conversations, meetings. The vibrating cavity modulated the reflected radio signal, which was then captured by Soviet receivers. The device was passive until activated by an external signal and produced no detectable emission of its own when not being illuminated. The ordered signals engineer who ultimately identified and explained how the device worked was Peter Wright, who would later write about it in his memoir. The device's designer, as later determined through intelligence sources, was Leon Theremin, the Russian physicist who had invented the theremin musical instrument, working under compulsion for Soviet intelligence. But here is where the Great Seal Bug changes what is possible to assume about any secure space. The device required no battery because it had no power source to run down. It required no installation because it had been in place for 7 years before being detected. It produced no signal to intercept unless it was being illuminated, which meant passive scanning alone could not find it. The method by which it was finally identified involved a combination of technical analysis and operational intelligence, not routine security procedures. Every object in a secure space is a potential container. Every surface that can resonate is a potential membrane. The Great Seal hung in the study of the American ambassador to the Soviet Union for 7 years, while conversations of the highest diplomatic sensitivity took place beneath it. The device required no maintenance. It needed no battery change. It was, in principle, indefinitely operational. The original device was shown to the United Nations Security Council by the American ambassador in 1960 during discussions about Soviet surveillance of American facilities. It is now held in the NSA's National Cryptologic Museum.
Number 4. Project PIGEON and what it led to. In the late 1950s, the Central Intelligence Agency's technical research programs included a reconnaissance project whose primary intelligence collection platform was a domestically common bird. Project Takana and related programs under similar designations equipped trained pigeons with miniature cameras strapped to their bodies. The cameras were triggered automatically by a timer mechanism and captured images at regular intervals as the pigeon flew over a target area. The pigeons were trained using behavioral conditioning methods developed from B.F. Skinner's research. Skinner himself had worked on a wartime pigeon guidance program for the military during the Second World War to fly specific routes that would carry them over target installations. The operational logic was sound in principle. A pigeon flying over a military facility is not identified as a surveillance threat. Radar systems do not track pigeons. Anti-aircraft systems do not engage them. A pigeon photographing a Soviet military installation from 200 feet altitude is collecting imagery that no human operator could safely collect from that position. The camera technology of the period placed real constraints on the program's operational utility. Image resolution, film capacity, and the mechanical reliability of miniaturized camera systems all created limitations that made the intelligence product less consistent than satellite or aircraft-based collection. The program was not the primary reconnaissance method. It was an experimental supplement. But here is where the Pigeon reconnaissance program matters not as an operational achievement, but as a developmental trajectory. The CIA's investment in miniaturized camera systems for the Pigeon program produced engineering knowledge, vendor relationships, and design specifications that were directly applicable to a parallel and far more consequential reconnaissance program, the development of the cameras used in the Corona satellite system, the first American photo reconnaissance satellite, which began producing imagery in 1960. Corona's cameras had to be small enough to fit inside a satellite, rugged enough to survive launch and orbital conditions, and capable of producing imagery at resolutions sufficient for military intelligence analysis. The engineering lineage from miniaturized airborne cameras to orbital cameras was not coincidental. It was the same problem at different scales: how to capture high-resolution imagery from a moving platform at altitude. The Pigeon cameras were not the program that changed American intelligence capability. They were one node in a development network whose output was the space-based reconnaissance architecture that defined the Cold War intelligence picture for the following 3 decades.
Number 3. The Dead Drop Spike. The dead drop spike is not a sophisticated device. It does not require a power source, a cipher, or any electronic component. It requires only a metal spike, a hollow core, and a waterproof seal. The spike is approximately 20 centimeters long, threaded at one end, and designed to be pushed into the ground at a prearranged location: the base of a specific tree, the edge of a marked path, a defined position within a park or wooded area. Inside the hollow core, a message, a roll of microfilm, or a package of currency can be concealed. The spike is then covered by its threaded cap. From above ground level, it is invisible. A person who does not know precisely where to look and what to look for will walk past it 10,000 times without finding it. The CIA's standard tradecraft kit for clandestine communication. It was used by CIA officers managing human assets in denied areas, behind the Iron Curtain, in countries with hostile counterintelligence services, where direct contact between the officer and the asset was too dangerous for either party. The asset would load the spike at a predetermined location and time. The officer would clear it, retrieve its contents, at a different time, without either party ever being seen together. The spike's operational utility rested on three properties. It was passive, it required no technology that could malfunction or be detected, and the communication it facilitated left no electronic trail. But here is where the dead drop spike, as a piece of technology, points towards something that sophisticated collection programs cannot replicate. The most advanced electronic surveillance system ever built requires two things: a signal to collect and an adversary who produces that signal. If a human intelligence asset loads a hollow spike with a handwritten message and pushes it into the ground at the base of a specific oak tree in a specific park, no signals intelligence program, no satellite, no intercept facility anywhere in the world produces any record that the communication occurred. The message travels from one human to another through the physical world, leaves no electromagnetic trace, and is retrievable only by someone who knows three things: the location, the time window, and what they are looking for. The CIA's most technically advanced programs, satellites, signals interception, penetration devices, have fundamental collection boundaries defined by the presence or absence of a signal. Human intelligence, communicated through a hollow metal spike pushed into the soil, has no such boundary. The spike does not broadcast, it does not transmit, it simply waits. Number 2. The Glomar Explorer and Project Jennifer. In 1968, a Soviet Golf-class submarine carrying 3 nuclear-armed ballistic missiles sank in the Pacific Ocean approximately 1,560 nautical miles northwest of Hawaii. The Soviet Navy conducted an extensive search and failed to locate the vessel. The wreck lay at a depth of approximately 4,900 meters, more than 3 miles below the surface. The CIA located it. Using signals intelligence, hydroacoustic monitoring from the SOS-US network, and triangulation methods that drew on data from multiple collection sources, CIA analysts determined the submarine's approximate location with sufficient precision to mark it on a chart. At that depth, the wreck was unreachable by any conventional salvage technology. The CIA decided to build the technology. Project Jennifer was approved at the highest levels of the United States government. Its operational cover was a public commercial venture, the Glomar Explorer, ostensibly built and operated by Howard Hughes's Hughes Glomar Explorer Company for the purpose of mining manganese nodules from the ocean floor. The cover story was detailed, publicized, and convincing. The ship was real, the mining equipment was real, the research that justified the commercial operation was real. Howard Hughes, whose eccentric reclusiveness and established business interests in unusual ventures made him credible as the sponsor of an obscure deep-sea mining project, provided the necessary public face. The Glomar Explorer was designed to lower a claw mechanism, a capture vehicle on a 3-mile cable, to the ocean floor, grasp the submarine and lift it to the surface inside a moon pool concealed within the ship's hull. The engineering required to accomplish this at that depth with that degree of precision did not exist before the program created it. But here is where Project Jennifer illustrates the fundamental principle of the CIA's technical collection philosophy. The program recovered a portion of the submarine in 1974. The forward section, including 2 of the 3 nuclear missiles, broke away during the lift and returned to the ocean floor. What was recovered included code materials, signals equipment, and the remains of Soviet naval personnel, who were subsequently given a burial at sea, a recording of which was provided to the Russian government after the Cold War ended. The Soviet government did not know any of this had happened. They did not know the CIA had located the submarine. They did not know the Glomar Explorer was a CIA operation. They did not know their submarine had been partially raised by a vessel they believed was mining manganese nodules. They did not know their code materials had been in American hands. The CIA later confirmed the operation's existence. The phrase that became part of the legal record, "we can neither confirm nor deny," entered the language as a standard government formulation for classified programs. The ship still exists. It was renamed, sold, and eventually used for legitimate deep-sea operations. The cable mechanism that lowered a claw to 3 miles below the surface of the Pacific Ocean is no longer installed.
Number 1. Corona, the satellite that was a fake weather program. On August 18, 1960, a United States Air Force capsule re-entered the Earth's atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean and was caught mid-air by a specially equipped aircraft operated by a recovery crew who knew exactly what they were catching and were not permitted to discuss it. Inside the capsule was a canister of photographic film. The film had been exposed by a camera system orbiting the Earth aboard a satellite designated Discoverer 14. The imagery it contained covered more territory in a single pass than all the U-2 reconnaissance aircraft flights conducted over the Soviet Union combined. The program was called Corona. Its public cover designation was Discoverer, a series of ostensible scientific research satellites operated under a joint NASA and Air Force program nominally engaged in biomedical and environmental research. The program launched test biomedical payloads that were described to the public in press releases. It returned film canisters that were described as scientific samples. The infrastructure of a legitimate scientific program was built around the actual mission, which was to photograph every significant military and industrial installation in the Soviet Union from orbit. The program had been conceived in the late 1950s, approved by President Eisenhower, and developed in complete secrecy by a team that included CIA officers, Air Force personnel, and Lockheed engineers under the Corona designation. The film capsule recovery system, a canister with a heat shield, a parachute, and a radio beacon caught from a C-119 aircraft trailing a hook, was an engineering achievement that required dozens of failed tests before the first successful recovery. The first successful film return from Discoverer 14 produced imagery that allowed American photo interpreters to identify Soviet missile launch facilities, airfield construction, submarine pens, and military installations whose existence, number, and location had previously been estimated through much less direct means. But here is where Corona's significance reaches beyond the satellite, the film, and the imagery it produced. Before Corona, American estimates of Soviet strategic military capability were estimates, educated assessments based on signals intelligence, human sources, technical analysis, and inference. The bomber gap, the belief in the mid-1950s that the Soviet Union possessed far more long-range bombers than the United States, had produced years of expensive American aircraft procurement and military planning based on a threat that did not exist at the scale believed. The missile gap, the belief that the Soviet Union was producing intercontinental ballistic missiles at a rate that threatened American strategic deterrence, had shaped a presidential election and multiple defense budgets. Corona imagery, beginning in 1960, allowed American analysts to count, not estimate, count
the number of Soviet bombers, the number of ICBM launch facilities, the number of submarine pens under construction, the physical infrastructure of Soviet strategic military capability rendered in photographic detail from orbit. The missile gap, as it turned out, ran in the opposite direction from what had been believed. The Soviet Union had fewer operational ICBMs than the United States had assumed. American defense planning had been shaped for years by an overestimate that direct imagery could have corrected years earlier had the collection capability existed. Corona remained classified until 1995. The satellites that replaced it, each with new generations, higher resolution, longer orbital duration, and more sophisticated film systems, remain classified to varying degrees today. Every generation of overhead reconnaissance capability the United States has deployed since 1960 descends directly from the engineering decisions made in the Corona program. The satellite that orbited above the Soviet Union in 1960, catching film canisters over the Pacific while its public face was a weather program, was not the beginning of space-based intelligence collection. It was the proof that it was possible. Everything after it was scale. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.